Hello, everyone. We'd like to welcome you to a Local 100 Fightback Coalition Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch live stream event. It's been a little while since we were last with you. The last time we went live was following the U.S. presidential debate between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. And I know when I say that now, I realize it seems like decades have passed since then. Um, but as Vladimir Lenin once said, sometimes there are years where months happen, and sometimes there are months where years happen. Um, like that, change can happen in a thunderclap. And we're going to be talking about the U.S. presidential elections later on in the live stream. But we wanted to cover somewhat of an update about what's been going on in Gaza and the Israeli genocidal occupation and brutal offensive in Gaza, and also the spilling over of that conflict into whole other sections of the region. So Seth is going to give somewhat of an introduction so that we can kind of frame the discussion, and then we're going to have a wide-ranging discussion. Reigadas is going to join us later in the discussion, and the floor is yours, Seth.
Yeah, thank you, John. Welcome everybody. It's been too long since we've been talking with you guys, and it's been much too long since we've had something on Gaza. And I wanted to apologize for all of Local 100 Fight Back about that. Obviously, many of us have been going to pro-Palestinian protests, anti-genocide protests, but we haven't had a live stream about it or put out anything about it in a while. So we wanted to, obviously the presidential elections are going on, and Kamala Harris is now the presumptive Democratic nominee. There's a lot going on there, but we wanted to take some time to give you an update on the situation in Gaza and some, somewhat positive developments with respect to solidarity with the Palestinian cause here in the United States. So given that, I'd like to get started. The big thing that and I wanted to raise with respect to the U.S. front is that it's really important for Local 100 workers and other workers and union workers in the country to know that a major letter was drafted by 7 very important U.S. unions to Joe Biden, taking the position that the U.S. must stop all arms shipments to Israel until there's a permanent ceasefire in Gaza. Now, I haven't memorized those unions. So the unions are the Association of Flight Attendants, the American Postal Workers Union, the International Union of Painters, the National Education Association, NEA, which is a very big union, the Service Employees International Union, SEIU, the United Auto Workers, UAW, and United Electrical Workers, UE. Those 7 major unions represent about 6 million unionized workers in the United States, and that's about half of all of unionized workers in the country, roughly. And so that's significant. And this represents a major positive development, having the organizations of the working class, some of the biggest ones and the strongest ones, like UAW, that just led and won a very militant strike, to actually come out and make a political statement, right? A lot of people you'll hear say that unions should just be about economic stuff for their workers. But if you look back to the times where unions have been the strongest and fighting and winning, unions have been about solidarity, not just within their own workers or even within unionized workers, but with the oppressed peoples of the world, including during the civil rights movement and other places during the Great Depression. Unions that were forming stood up for people who are unemployed. And this, under the idea, an injury to one is an injury to all, basic statements of solidarity are really important. And so we at Local 100 Fight Back have been really the main ones as political transit workers to stand up and to discuss the situation, the genocide in Gaza committed by Israel. And so we want to applaud these other unions and urge Local 100 to sign on to that letter. We plan to reach out to our executive board members and to try and push our leadership to do so. we do not have high hopes, unfortunately. Our union leadership under the corrupt and awful leader, President Richie Davis, has been very conservative, silent on major issues, and also selling out our own members with things like retirees with Medicare Advantage. So we don't have high hopes for that, but of course, as oppositionists within this union, we plan to fight hard to try to, other unions have already taken this step. So Local 100 doesn't have to be courageous and step out and be the first. Other unions have done that, to just stand in solidarity with them and to try and spread the word. So given that, I do want to say that, the reason why this is so important, we'll talk a little bit about the situation, what's going on in Gaza and in Israel. There have been a lot of disturbing developments. This is really important because what's going on in Gaza is a genocide. It's both with respect to military attacks, destroying communities, destroying hospitals, schools, universities, targeting doctors, targeting aid workers and aid organizations, starvation, blocking aid to go in. That's been documented by the international community. That this is most certainly a genocide, and those who stand up against it are, there's a large coalition of people. Given it's a war crime and ethnic cleansing and genocide, it's the basic human thing to do, to stand up against it. Some people are just because of the human rights violations against it. Others understand that it's part of a decades-long history of Israel being formed from ethnic cleansing and mass murder in 1948, and following through, becoming an apartheid regime. Say again? Oop, hello? John, did you freeze? Well,
okay, I think we're back. I think we're back now.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, so I was just giving a quick background on the history. Israel has been an apartheid state, as documented by the UN, as by Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch. You can look all that stuff. It's well documented. It's really important just to point out, I think I have to frame it every time, that inside the United States, right, the coverage of Israel is by the mainstream media and by the government is absurdly kind to Israel and completely Orwellian and dishonest, right? If you look at the UN and you look at the rest of the world, states recognizing Palestine, states condemning Israel for genocide, states joining in on the ICJ case led by South Africa, you can see that what we exist in this bubble in the United States where the press coverage and the government's treatment of Israel is just absurdly Orwellian. What you have is a genocidal apartheid state that has been ethnically cleansing in the occupied West Bank for decades, and yet they're treated like some beacon of democracy, which is absolutely absolute lies. And so, as we talk, it's important to look out and to see what the rest of the world thinks about this. And just to give you some background on that, right, recent cases, right, South Africa brought the case to the ICJ, the International Court of Justice. I believe that's the correct. Yes. No, I think that's the ICC. But in any case, the ICJ, they brought a case of genocide because of Israel's attacks on Gaza. The case was allowed to continue by the court because that they found a prima facie case for genocide. That doesn't mean it was completely decided, but there was enough evidence to allow the case to continue and not to dismiss it, with it being probable that genocide was being committed. They did not call for a ceasefire, but they called for restriction on Israel with respect to punishing anyone who did anything that could be considered part of the genocide or inciting genocide, which Israel has completely ignored. They have right-wing ministers, Ben Gvir and Smotrich, both of whom are far-right fascists based on settler parties who have openly called for genocide, and they have not been punished whatsoever. So Israel is in violation. So So in addition, you have the ICC, which is the International Criminal Court, I believe, which is actively trying to get arrest warrants for both Israeli leaders, Benjamin Netanyahu and Gallant, who I believe is the war minister, in addition to Hamas leaders for war crimes in Gaza. Then recently, if you can look that up as well. Once back to the ICJ, which is the court connected to the UN. The court had a final finding with respect to Israel's occupation of the West Bank and East Jerusalem, confirming that the occupation is illegal and that Israel is illegally ethnically cleansing in the area and pushing settlers in to force out Palestinians off their land in violation of international law. So this is all providing this background so you understand that when we talk about as socialists, as leftists, about Israel being a genocidal apartheid state, and that doesn't fit with what the Biden administration is saying or what most of the mainstream media in the US says, that's because the skewing here in the United States is so horribly off that they constantly lie about Israel, while the rest of the world, countries like Spain and Ireland, Turkey have all joined the case against Israel, condemning it for genocide. So this is an international thing. And so, when these unions in the United States join onto that and start to try and break through what we see in the this Orwellian lies about Israel that we hear in the United States, then it's very important for us to amplify that to get that word out. So there's been a number of recent developments in the situation with respect to the attacks, the assassinations by Israel on Hamas and Hezbollah leaders in Lebanon. The Hamas attack was in Tehran, Iran, and the attack on the Hezbollah leader was in the outskirts of Beirut, Lebanon. So we can talk about that. And there's also, we need to talk about the situation that's been going on with respect to the exposure of systematic torture and rape of Palestinian prisoners in Israel in violation of the Geneva Convention, and Israel, the international community's reaction to that, and Israel's reaction to that, and then the reaction of right-wing Israelis to Israel trying to do a little cleaning house. So I think that's at least a good place to open up the conversation, and we can go further from there.
Yeah. Okay, Seth, I'd like to thank you, for framing the discussion. That was a little more thorough than we had talked about, but
Sorry.
It's always good to flesh things out more. And Seth, it's important that your voice is heard on this issue in particular, largely because of the way in which a lot of the rhetoric in the United States is about tying all Jews to the state of Israel, as if Israel actually represents all Jews or is doing anything to make Jews safe. In fact, it's doing the exact opposite and putting a huge target on their backs all over the world. Because when their own ministers, one of the leading ministers for women in the Israeli Knesset said, we want people around the world to know the Jews did this. We want people around the world to know that it was the Jews that destroyed Gaza. So so when they do that, they're not making the world safe for Jews. They're targeting Jewish people for the kind of anti-Semitism they face in the world. We actually have a question that I just wanted to answer. Steve Zeltzer said the question is, what are you going to do about this in the TWU? How could you leave that out when there's a struggle in many other unions against genocide? Well, Steve, I think you might have not caught part of the beginning of the live stream, because Seth was talking about our intention and our outreach to try to raise this at the highest levels of power in TWU. Maybe he means the international. I mean, yeah, we want to raise it there too. But we have to be honest with everyone that the people on the executive board in our union and the people on the international executive board. I mean, Samuelson is meeting with George Latimer, for Christ's sake. He's meeting with arch racist enemies of integration. I mean, so we have to be honest with ourselves about where our union leadership is right now. That doesn't mean the demands don't need to be what the demand should be based on what is needed in the situation. But we do have to have some consciousness of how rotten and conservative our leadership is. So as far as responding to the recent developments in Israel, I mean, for anybody who talks about Israel is just doing this to defend themselves and they're under attack and they're constantly under attack and this is just about self-defense, I mean, go read the reportage of what has been going on at a literal concentration camp in Israel, where Palestinian youth, mostly men, were rounded up, not because they were involved in any kind of military or physical confrontation with the IDF, just because they were, quote, military age men. They were just rounded up. They were put into this concentration camp and kept blindfolded 24 hours a day with sensory deprivation. They were sodomized with metal rods that were heated. That the use of this torture on people made them unable to be to function like as a normal human being. And this was going on the whole time of this occupation. It makes Abu Ghraib look like nothing in terms of torture. In fact, you can compare it to any kind of torture in the world anywhere. And this is what was unleashed by Israel, supposedly in response to getting back the hostages, supposedly in response to defending themselves from the attack on October 7th. And the kind of dehumanization that went on there is just only now coming to light. And that had everything to do with the complicity of the United States, has everything to do with the Biden administration and the Harris administration and the entire, the entire mainstream political perspective on Israel. We have another comment. What are you doing to fight to expose them? This is Steve. There are many members here who are opposed to the genocide, organizing them. Have you set up a group of members for Palestine to organize these members? Well, Steve, we were part of helping to build a New York section of Labor for Palestine. So there are things going on here, and there have been. And part of the reason why, we haven't had as many outreach in terms of live streams about this is because we were involved in all of that work. We were reaching out to people in the Amazon Labor Union and other unions to help get those organizations off the ground. We're also involved in these protests. So it's not like those things haven't been happening, but we are definitely trying to pick up the pressure in terms of publicly exposing our union leaders for their betrayals. So anyway, I just want to leave my commentary there and get to Ray if you wanted to introduce yourself. Ray Reigadas is a train operator in A Division and a member of the local Fightback Coalition. So Ray, if you want to just introduce yourself and any thoughts you might have.
Yeah, it's like you said, I'm a train operator, and I think I said this before. We had a live stream back in the fall. It's being a victim of terror doesn't give you carte blanche to commit war crimes. I mean, they're using the same justification for the treatment of these men that we use when we say, oh well, we killed 15 terrorists in a drone strike, and it was just we classified every man in 100 yards who's over the age of 12 as a terrorist, regardless of whether we knew who they were. just because that way you can pretend you didn't kill anybody who didn't deserve it. I mean, at this point, there's been over 40,000 dead in Palestine, and the entire everybody there has been displaced. And you can't tell. I mean, pre-war, the entire fighting force of Hamas was maybe 15,000. So by any measure, you've killed at least 20,000 people who didn't have anything to do with Hamas. You can't pretend that you haven't, that Israel hasn't murdered civilians. And that's before you take into account it's impossible to completely level a fucking city like they have block by block, and not without collateral damage, without harming civilians. You've had, in addition to the official treatment of prisoners, they've been tipping off the IDF and Israeli police, tipping off right-wing activists when aid shipments are coming through roadblocks, so they can actually physically prevent them from getting, from sending, food, medical supplies. And it's not even stuff that's going to Gaza. They've stopped trucks and set them on fire because they weren't going to Jewish territories, just because the drivers were Muslims. It's both sides have been guilty of horrifying crimes. And you were saying before about equating Israel, all Jews with Israel. I'm seeing a lot of stickers around, like somebody keeps putting up on lampposts like anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, and it's a lot of horseshit. Not every Jew is an Israeli. Not every Israeli, even especially not every American Jew, has an interest in Zionism. It's it's not synonymous with Judaism, and to pretend it is dishonest, and it's a way to to further justify the horrifying treatment that they've been giving to the people in Palestine, and to just gloss over the the thousands of innocent dead, and all the people who weren't involved in anything, like they've targeted journalists and aid workers as well. I mean, that convoy from World Central Kitchen told the IDF they were going to be there so they wouldn't get fired on, and they still got fired on because they were helping the other side, because the IDF considers anyone who's not Israeli to be on the other side. And it's a horrific situation. And Netanyahu is just as big an impediment to peace as Hamas is, because he knows as long as he's got an enemy to fight, he's probably safe. So it's just tragic. And, we in this country long ago learned you can't fight terrorism by bombing it. We fucking destroyed Afghanistan and Iraq, and what did that do? It killed a whole lot of terrorists, it created a whole lot more, and it made a whole lot of other people suffer immensely. And in the end, we wasted billions and billions and probably trillions of dollars, and we expended thousands of lives of Americans who volunteered to go over, who thought they were defending their country. And in the end, we're arguably worse off than we were, because now you have this power vacuum where people used to be that's now occupied by, non-state actors. And it's just where Gaza is going to be. You can't murder terrorism. You can't blow up. You can kill everyone in a group. You're just going to create more people who want to carry on that cause because you've killed their family and you destroyed everything they had to live for.
Yeah, thank you, Ray. And also, just so we are clear, the 40,000 number is precipitously low because the people who would normally do that count can't even get in because of the rubble and because of the devastation. And the Lancet, a very well-respected English scientific medicine and medical agency, estimated that it was close to 186,000 people dead.
I think, John, that's also projecting into the future some with respect
it may be also projecting if nothing changes. Yeah, what would happen?
Yeah, because that's several times higher than it's been recently. There's no reason to suspect it won't get to that point.
Yeah,
I do. Those are, but the 40,000 is certainly, from my understanding, like people where they had some corpse or remains and they were able to connect it up to an identity. There's the latest data I have seen says there's expected good estimates. There's at least 10,000 more buried under the rubble who have not been recovered whatsoever, and who are, some listed as missing. or whatever. So there's no doubt that 40,000 is an undercount.
Yes.
At all. One point I just wanted to add to what Ray was saying, I agreed with a lot of what he was saying, is that the cost of the U.S. Invasions of the Middle East, the main one that always is in my mind is the hundreds of thousands of innocent Afghanis and Iraqis killed in the brutal U.S. invasions and occupations, in addition to U.S. troops and property damage and instability and all that. Is it okay if I say a couple more things? I wanted to follow up on. I think that I really appreciate Ray connecting up Israel's response after 10/7 to the U.S. response after 9/11. I think it's worth pushing that further because, as we know, the attacks on 9/11 were in part, America was a target because of, not because the people over there hate our freedom or anything like that, but because the U.S. has been a brutal imperial power, installing dictators, overthrowing governments, supporting Israel in its ethnic cleansing for decades. From the Suez Canal to the support for Saddam Hussein, to the overthrowing a democratic regime to put the Shah in. So the U.S. had a murderous history in the Middle East, and 9/11 was blowback for that. Just like that, right? It's important to remember that with respect to Israel, Israel has been a murderous apartheid regime built on mass murder and ethnic cleansing from 1948. And to the people who say, well, Israel had a right to defend itself and to attack Hamas after 10/7, completely forget the fact that Israel has a long and consistent history of mass murdering Palestinians who are not rising up, who are just marching or just in their own town or who have land that Israel wants. That has been going on for decades. It's well documented that Israel has started a majority of the conflicts, right, and kills at a ratio of about 20-1, including women and children, compared to what Palestinians has inflicted on Israel. So the idea that 10/7 and the genocide that we're seeing is somehow just a response, or that what happened after 10/7 was just a response to 10/7 is absolutely a lie. The invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan used 9/11 as an excuse, right? The U.S. bloody imperialism has been doing that type of thing for decades. And just as that, Israel has been mass murdering Palestinians, running apartheid, ethnically cleansing people who are just trying to live, coexist peacefully in the West Bank, and have been doing that, for decades. And 10/7 gave them an excuse to let it rip and to commit genocide under that backing. So I think it's important to say that. And just finally, I just want to agree with both John and Ray in talking about that this talk about anti-Semitism is simply an attempt to stifle dissent and to stifle criticism of Israel. There is anti-Semitism in the United States. Overwhelmingly, it comes from the far right in this country. It comes from the people like MAGA, like Trump, who like Nick Fuentes, who support Israel, right? I'm not sure about Nick Fuentes, but the far right overwhelmingly supports Israel in its attack on Palestine. And that's where most of the anti-Semitism comes from. There is some anti-Semitism on the left. If you look at it, it's a tiny percentage, right? But people who say that criticism of Israel is criticism of Jews is just a lie. The fact is that through most of history, Jews were not Zionists, and they did not support Zionism. Zionism was a reactionary attempt by mostly wealthy Jews to find a place for their capital and to create a state. But most working class Jews, especially in Europe, who were very oppressed, wanted to fight. Many of whom wanted to fight for liberation of all humans, and not just to find some reactionary homeland for Jewish people. I would argue, I think there are good arguments that Judaism itself is anti-Semitic. If you look, Zionism is anti-Semitic. If you look at the history of Zionism, if you look at leaders like Ben Gurion, who are quoted as saying that they're willing to support the death of Jewish children in England, so that some of them could get to Israel. It's a horrible quote, but it's nonetheless true. And many of the Zionist leaders actually identified with the criticisms of the Jewish poor and the Jewish working class that the fascists had. So there's a lot of history there to show that both Zionism itself has very strong anti-Semitic trends, and that a long history of significant numbers, majority or significant number of Jews being against Zionism. And so that, that we completely reject this idea that this is somehow that criticism of Israel or standing with the Palestinians against, standing with the Palestinians and being against the genocide is somehow anti-Semitic, right? It's the long history of radical Judaism in support of the most oppressed people of the world proudly stands with Palestine against the butchers of Israel.
And in fact, it was one of the most talked about lessons of the Holocaust was never again, that we would never allow what happened to the Jews in Nazi Germany and Poland and all the other countries to ever happen again. It did not mean never again for us, never again for one ethnicity, one religion, one nationality. And aside from which, the people who are just like Rudy Giuliani stood on the bodies of 9/11 victims, and as Joe Biden famously mocked him, saying that everything he says is a noun, a verb, and 9/11. Well, in the same way, Netanyahu and Smotrich and Ben Gvir and all the rest of them stand on the bodies of the Warsaw Ghetto victims who were murdered by the Nazis, and the Zionists served as snitches and informants in betraying that struggle against the rise of fascism in Europe. And there was a chance to smash fascism in Europe, and it was that struggle was being led by Jews, and those Jews went to their death because of these supposed good Jews, these supposed defenders against anti-Semitism. Their entire ideology is a lie, and it's politically bankrupt. And every attack on Palestinian humanity is a confession of their own depraved indifference for human life. And so, just like the right wing in this country, every time they talk about the left and try to make the left the groomers and the sex predators and all of that, it's a confession, and they're snitching on themselves. And they're snitching on themselves because they think that everybody thinks like them. And so, and with that kind of depraved indifference and ulterior motives and all of that. So it's instructive. Look at the U.S. right, and you look at the Israeli government, and the way in which they play politics is very similar in that way. And U.S. representatives who went along with this new McCarthyism all across this country are not defenders against anti-Semitism. If you support McCarthyism and witch hunts, who do you think are going to be in the crosshairs of the right wing when they take power? Which are already talking about great replacement theories. They're already talking about the Jews are secretly behind all of the influx of immigration into the United States. You can't say that you hate Trump and you hate MAGA, but you support Ben Gvir and Smotrich and Netanyahu are 1,000 times more racist, 1,000 times more genocidal, and 1,000 times more dangerous in terms of what they are actually doing right now. We had originally said we were going to take about 30 minutes on this topic, so I want to begin to wrap up. So Seth, if you have further comments on this, or Ray, And we do have an election to talk about. If you guys might have heard, there's a massive election going on in a couple of months that may determine the future of American democracy. So we want to give that some time as well. For those of you who are saying, we should be elaborating on Local 100, we are doing that, and we will be doing that. But this particular discussion is a political education discussion on these particular topics because they inform what's going on in this country as well. And you'll begin to see that later in the discussion. Seth, go ahead if you wanted to wrap up on this topic.
Well, I'll give Ray another chance to, if he has anything else he wants to say on the matter.
Yeah. Oh,
Okay,
thank
great.
you. Yeah. A lot of people don't know this, but the reason the American right side so staunchly with Israel is, well, partly because they don't give a shit about Muslims. They look at them and they think, oh, they worship a totally different God. Fuck them. They're, but also because the American right is dominated by evangelicals. And the evangelicals believe that under their interpretation of the book of Revelation, Israel must exist in order for the end of the world to occur, and then they get to go to heaven, and the rest of us are stuck down here fighting in the eternal battle or whatever their shit is. So remember, it's not that they like Israel and Jews, it's that they just think that this is this is how the world ends, and the rest of us can go fuck off and die in fire, and disease and whatnot. It's not about them thinking that these guys are right. It's just them thinking, we're this close to getting into heaven, and the rest of you, I don't give a shit about.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. I want to put a pin in that. I'll get back to that point because I think that definitely is a piece to why the evangelical right supports Israel, but I think there are deeper geopolitical reasons why the overwhelming spectrum of U.S. politics and media and capitalists support Israel. And I'll get into that in a second. I do want to first go back to the point that John brought up with respect to this exposure of rape and torture by the Israeli military at these detention camps, and combine that with what Ray was talking about with respect to the settlers stopping, literally getting information from the government with respect to aid trucks going into Gaza and stopping them, beating up and destroying the aid, beating up the drivers and destroying the aid. Because the point I want to make from those, well, let me say a little bit about the detention camps first, which is that it's really important to go into what happened. This has just all been breaking in the last couple days, is that this was exposed and it was confirmed, and the international community basically threatened to do an investigation because these are war crimes, right? By the Geneva Convention, you have to treat prisoners a certain way. And so the fact that this was going on triggered the fact that Israel there could be arrest warrants again for war crimes and an international investigation. And if there isn't one done by Israel, then it's going to be done by the international community. And so what happened is Israel actually took a step and detained, they almost never do, but detained 9 IDF soldiers and maybe some police. I forget exactly who were the 9, but they detained them to do the investigation. And what happened afterward is key, which is that the far right in Israel protested at this camp where these torturers and rapists were being held, and they protested not against rape and torture, but in favor of rape and torture. Right? They wanted these people, they called them heroes, and wanted them released. And they actually stormed the gates, including Israeli, what they would call congressmen, right? MKs, members of the Knesset, were part of the crowd. They broke into this camp and into a military camp, right? And protested in there and caused havoc. There were actually military police who were supposed to arrest these soldiers, these torturers, right? Fighting the soldiers in the camps, or at least struggling with them. This was a big deal, right? And so the reason I want to bring this up is because it tells you something about Israeli society, where when you have exposures of rape and torture of Palestinians inside Israeli camps, that Israelis don't come out to protest against that. They come out to protest in favor of the rape and torture, right? Just as you have Israelis when there's aid trying to get into Gaza, they don't help the aid through. They block the aid and destroy the aid rather than get it to Palestinians. And these are indications that the society of Israel, right, is a fascist society. It's where the far right is dominating everything, and that they are in charge, right, and that they are there'll be mass protests in order to support the most heinous acts. Now there are also protests against the Netanyahu government, and there are and there's been a back and forth on that as well. But we are seeing a society, right, where there is a deep support for the most violent acts, right? There's no the mass protests there. They're not calling it genocide against Netanyahu. They're not calling it genocide. Some call for a ceasefire, but most focus on getting the hostages back, right? And so I just want to bring that up, just talk about, right, the state of Israeli society. It's a far right society right now with no left whatsoever, basically just a handful of people. And it's a very dangerous place. And the fact that this is a society of Jews has become this is a very, it places both world Jewry and the Jews there in a very dangerous position, because they are committing such acts of terror and such acts of war crimes and crimes against humanity that it creates a very bad image for us and builds up hatred, right? And so that we have to distinguish Israel as a state, right, as a genocidal apartheid state, and what it does from world Jewry itself. And the final point I want to make that I think we could transition in is going back to the letter. I'll wrap up with that. Is one of the reasons why this letter is so important is because, and why we're focusing on Israel, right, is because Americans can do something about it. Union workers can do something about it, right? The genocide is only going on because of the massive support that the U.S. government has provided. It is armed and funded this genocide, and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have been a major part of that, and we have to be honest about that. And that we have to, that by taking a position against that, we can stand up against our own government and its the blood on its hands for supporting this. And make note, you'll hear all these people say one thing or another, but Israel depends on billions of dollars of military and financial aid from the U.S. every year. If that aid were to be cut off or even threatened to cut off, it would cause major ripples in Israeli society. And the final thing I wanted to say was just to add to what Ray said, which is that I think you have to understand that the major geopolitical reasons why the U.S. supports Israel so much, right, is not because of some conspiracy or Jews controlling, or AIPAC even controlling the U.S. government, right? The fact is that the U.S. government supports Israel because Israel is an ally and tool of U.S. imperialism in the region, right? It's a Western colonial state, right, settled by Ashkenazi Jews in a key region that can project force for U.S. imperialism in a way that no other U.S. allies can. U.S. has allies like Saudi Arabia and Egypt and places like that, but Israel is a reliable ally with massive military force that can exert force in that region in U.S. interests to intimidate or attack regimes there and to keep the Arab masses under control. And so when people talk about why there's all this funding, is because Israel and the U.S. are often see eye to eye on things. The U.S. is a bloody imperialist, just like Israel is a minor bloody imperialist. And so we have to understand that this is not, you can look again and again at how U.S. foreign policy has worked. They talk about peace and say all that stuff, but in the end, they back Israel over and over and over again, right? So the tail doesn't wag the dog here. The U.S. is the top hegemonic power in the world, right? And Israel is a key ally in the region. I don't say that as a positive thing, because the U.S. foreign policy is not a positive thing. And so we have to understand that as well, that there are major geopolitical reasons that drive U.S. imperialism, and U.S. imperialism, does the same type of things that Israel does. And so that's the knot that we have to cut.
Yeah, and we need look no further than Joe Biden for refresher on that. I mean, he once said on the U.S. Senate floor that had Israel not existed, the United States would have to create her, openly saying that their role is indispensable in furthering the needs and the aims of U.S. global supremacy and U.S. imperialism. So just to pivot to the elections, so where were we the last time we were discussing this? We were talking about Joe Biden. We were providing commentary while watching the Joe Biden versus Donald Trump debate. And Seth, I got to give you credit at the same night that this was happening. Shortly thereafter, you said that Biden had to drop out and that there's just no way he could win the election. Like we had thought long before that Biden had a serious uphill battle to have any chance to win, and that the debate would have to be a reset of the race in order for Biden to have any chance. And shortly after his disastrous performance, Seth was first among us to say it's over, like he has to get out. And what the recognition that Seth came to was soon shared across the political spectrum in pretty much an unprecedented change in public opinion about what was possible and what had to happen in order to defeat Donald Trump. So much so that Nancy Pelosi, when is the last time we've been on the same side of barricades with Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer or any of these people on any issue? And yet, you can say whatever you want about her being the pro-imperialist, blood-soaked monster that she is, but Nancy Pelosi knows a winner and knows a loser. She knows how she knows what's a winning strategy and what's a losing strategy. And even mainstream corporate Democrats had to pull the ripcord on Biden. It went so far that there are reports that Barack Obama had a conversation with Joe Biden shortly after he dropped out of the race on Sunday, telling Joe that if he wouldn't drop out, that they would be forced to invoke the 25th Amendment and have him removed from office, and that they already had Kamala Harris's approval to do so. I don't know if that was true or not, but that combined with Nancy Pelosi saying that we've gone the easy route, but we can go the hard route, was clearly, part of the calculus that led Biden to drop out. But what drove all of that was a massive rebellion amongst the base of the Democratic Party, and just the flagging numbers in terms of youth, in terms of people of color, in terms of people in the uncommitted movements that have grown all over the country over outrage on the policy on Gaza and Israel. So I just wanted to frame what happened. As we know, Kamala Harris has now been is now the presumptive nominee of the Democratic Party, and since then, pretty much in the last, it's just this maybe like 12 or 13 days she's been in the race. The polls and the popular opinion and the enthusiasm of Democratic voters in terms of voting in the upcoming election is completely transformed, and it's come to the point where many people are talking about it being a 50-50 race. And this is before she's picked a VP. This is before a Democratic National Convention, and this is after Donald Trump was nearly assassinated not that long ago, and had his Republican National Convention, which was an absolute disaster, which was nothing but a grievance fest and basically red meat for the base. Even though they started out talking about, we're going to be preaching unity. How long did that last? Did it last like not even the first day of the convention? And they immediately went back to the same talking points and the same disunity that they can't help themselves but constantly throw out there. And then ever since Kamala's gotten in the race, basically they have no approach, no response on policy or on anything else towards Kamala Harris, what comes out of the clown car is every racist DEI trope, every sexist trope about. I mean, they've gone so far as to call her the original Haktur, basically saying that she climbed her way up the ladder through sexual relations with politicians in California, Willie Brown in particular. Like these are the kinds of things that they've rolled out there. It's basically, you press one button and you get racism, press another button and you get sexism, and no matter what they say, they keep digging their own grave. And J.D. Vance is another gift that keeps on giving. Every time he opens his mouth, it's another clueless, sexist comment about, people without children and just all of this aggrievement about wokeness and all of that, which is great for their base in terms of turning them out. But there's only so much of their MAGA base to actually turn out, and they're not a majority of the country, and they never have been. And they can only win a low turnout election. And if you look at the polls, just a sampling of the coverage of what's happening, this is not going to be a low turnout election, and they're in big trouble because of that. Just based on the enthusiasm numbers, you look at the enthusiasm numbers of Democratic voters as opposed to Republican voters, it's almost completely flipped, and it's really a dangerous place to be for a campaign that can only win by not winning the popular vote and somehow securing, an anti-democratic electoral college scheme, or outright voter suppression and illegal attempts to overturn the election through state attorneys generals and other means. Seth, it looks like the lights are going out. You okay?
Yeah, I'm getting some flickering here. I don't know if it's brownouts or I'm not sure what it is, but hopefully.
Right, well, let's hope we have some electricity for the rest of the live stream. But I'm going to throw open the discussion. I just want to try to frame what's happened and how the dynamics of the race have changed, and now we're going to get into a wider discussion about what it means. So, Seth, do you want to comment here, or
let's Ray go first.
I'll go first.
Oh, thank you.
If you want.
It's Trump. I mean, he always reacts to anybody with insults, but with women, he's really bad at it. He only knows how to insult them as being ugly. Like he calls them nasty. Like when E. Jean Carroll publicly accused him of rape, he said, "Oh, I would never have had sex with her," even though in court he accidentally identified her as Marla Maples in a photograph. It's and a woman of color is even worse for him. He gets worse and worse with his insults, and it's funny because he was actually almost on message with the discipline for a few months, and he was just like basically he just seemed to have gotten the message that all he had to do was not say crazy and stupid and awful shit, and Biden's general demeanor would not inspire people to vote for him, and he could walk into the White House that way. But Harris has just completely thrown him off, and he's gotten worse. Like he's completely gone off message and just started saying all sorts of really ugly shit. I mean, anytime you hear someone say DEI hire, that's because they can't say the N word on TV. That's what they just really want to say that. And then he went and said, "Oh no, she was she was never black before she was Indian. She was always black." I think most people would say she's black before they saw her as Indian. And I saw somebody the other day actually in a Facebook group saying, "Oh no, she's white." I'm looking at her like, I don't think there's any white blood in her. She's Jamaican and Indian. That she's extremely not white. I mean, if you think she's white, I don't know what the fuck you consider to be a white person. But it just shows the Republicans don't really know how to deal with her. And it goes to JD Vance too. He's got to he's making these big swings at her about and they're just completely at a loss at how to fight her. Not just because they don't, she doesn't have the biggest. Like that, nobody really cares what somebody did as a local prosecutor, as the attorney general. They're looking at a record of the Senate, and they're just at a loss and all they're doing is just digging the hole deeper for themselves and making people realize, oh yeah, these guys are shitty. They're every time they say these things, they just remind people of how bad they are and what kind of people stand with them. Seth, you okay?
Yeah, Seth is
Yeah.
having some struggles with
Yeah,
Okay.
that.
sorry. I'm going to turn off my camera so it doesn't distract. We're having some power issues. Let me just see. You guys
Okay.
keep going. I'm going to see if I can do some, if it's local
Yeah.
or anything. Okay. Just, yeah,
Okay.
All
you
right.
keep going.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um,
And it's really kind of fortuitous that Biden chose to drop out after Trump had picked Vance, because I'm not sure any of the other possibilities for VP for him would have been this terrible about women. I mean, JD Vance has this weird obsession with women's fertility. Oh, he's talking shit like, oh, people without children shouldn't get to vote, and they don't because they don't have any stake in the future, and people with kids should be able to cast votes for their children, which is bullshit on number levels, partly because how many people agree with what their parents think?
right.
I mean, every teenager would sit, almost would tell their parents, "No, I don't want you to vote that way because kids fight with their parents on these things." But he's got this very weird obsession, which is common among evangelicals, about women's fertility, because to them, women are basically just baby factories, and
Yeah.
that's all they care about. It's how you're only as good as the number of children you've got. Like you saw in the RNC, like you have women introducing themselves. I have 5 kids. I have 7 kids. One of them had 11 goddamn children. I mean, okay,
Yeah.
that's the life you chose for yourself, but 11 children is a hell of a lot of work. And in these households, I would bet most of them, the woman is doing all the child raising, not the husband.
That's if they're
Yeah,
not nanny. That's if they don't have nannies and domestic staff to take care of them. You
yeah,
know. You
yeah. The
know.
wealthy ones have domestic staff,
Yeah. Exactly.
but she's the worst possible candidate for the GOP to go up against, because they've always had trouble with women. And Trump was making inroads with non-white men because they were drawn to his toxic masculinity, and they're like, I like the way he talks. It's like, yeah, you just like that he says whatever the fuck he wants without care for the consequence. I mean, if nobody could legally slap you across the face for the things you said, you'd probably feel emboldened to say the same things. That doesn't mean he's a good person, but she's a candidate they can't figure out how to deal with. And you know like I said, and just by being on the ticket, she jumped back. The race is now a tie again, and she hasn't gotten the convention bounce yet. And Trump not only failed to get a bounce for the convention, he failed to get a bounce from being shot at, which is almost inconceivable. Because the day after, everybody was looking around like, "Shit, I think the race is over at this point." I mean, it takes a hell of a lot of for a person to waste the sympathy of an assassination attempt. That'd be
Yeah.
like George W. Bush, in the 2002 midterms, somehow costing his party, the House and the Senate because he was just that bad.
Yeah. Well, I think also, like, it's not just that he didn't get a bounce; he got a negative bounce of -5. Okay,
Yeah.
and his VP candidate JD Vance is like -12.
Yeah.
Okay? And in the states that surround Ohio, it's in the -25 area.
Hmm.
That's how bad it is. But like when we were talking about like his weird views on women, I mean, it's not it's shocking that it's so like they're so clueless and that they can't help themselves. But on the other hand, it's not so shocking when you understand that JD Vance comes from a libertarian
Hmm.
kind of um, neo-Nazi, neonatalist kind of perspective. They see women as broodmares of the state, and how are they going to get the votes of white women? That's what I want to know. Because when they think about broodmares of the states, they're not thinking of women of color; they're thinking of white women
Hmm.
because they're constantly insanely focused on the great replacement theory, on the birth rates. I mean, you hear like Charlie Kirk and what's the other idiot's name, Ben Shapiro, constantly obsessing about our birth rates, and we're not. It's bad for society. It's bad for them because they feel like when they're no longer the majority in society that it will change
Yeah.
how.
And it
And
says a lot that they think that their concern is they will no longer be the majority, because they can't see non-white people treating them better than they treat non-white people.
Right, it's projection.
They
It's exactly the
automatically
same.
assume that once they're no longer in power, everyone's going to just shit on them and treat them like, they're going to have a harder time getting, jobs and getting loans, and they're going to get profiled by the police. They just can't conceive of a world where people are just being.
Right, because they're snitching on themselves because they know what they did. I mean,
Yeah.
Charlie Clerk's not an angel. He was providing buses with people with arms on them
Mhm.
to go to January 6th to storm the Capitol and engage in insurrection. It's not like these people are babes in the woods. They know what they did. So does Elon Musk. He knows what he did too, inspiring.
Speaking of the great replacement theory.
Yeah, and Tucker Carlson and all of them, they all have blood on their hands. So they know what they do, and they know what they troll in and what their stock in trade is. Stochastic terrorism. And they do it on the regular. And so they feel like, well, after what we've done, I mean, I would just assume people would do this to us, if we're the minority. Seth, do you want to get in here, or is your lighting situation okay now?
I think it's improved. Hopefully we'll see. I appreciate the conversation so far. In particular about, right, they know what they did. And I think that's a good place to start out from, right? Like January 6th, and all that sort of stuff, and the background of racist terror by MAGA and by in the South, and which is a big part of American history, is all comes into the framing here. And I think it's important to me. It goes back to what we were talking about at the debate, right? Which is that this debate is very easy framing for workers, for unions, for Black people, for Muslims, for immigrants, for gay people, for women, right? This is a battle of fascism, right? Trump and MAGA represent fascism coming to the United States. January 6th shows that. The spike in right-wing shootings and violence, and all the swarms that come down on people who speak out against Trump or who stand up, right? Or it's about the book bannings. It's about making abortion illegal, and then about them wanting not to have women travel from state to state, right? Monitoring their periods, right? This is what's at stake in our society. And the debate was, the debate was disturbing for me because Biden showed that he couldn't stand up to Trump. It was like an encapsulation of everything. And so I think it's, in some ways, I think the debate was a good thing because it showed the rest of the world what, we were going to support Biden, not because I'm not a Democrat, I'm a socialist, right? We were going to support Biden, not because we liked him or saw he was an ally, but because he was the only thing that would help us delay fascism for a while and actually build the type of movements, continue to do the work that Local 100 Fightback has been doing, and other people, building the movements they can to defeat the right and to fight back against fascism. It gives us more breathing room. But Biden showed that he was not up to the task. And as John said, right after the debate, I knew he basically was a long shot. People said it was close before. It wasn't close before. And then after the debate, I would put him at a 10 or 15% chance at best. Nate Silver doesn't exactly say that, but he's a very good modelist and polling aggregate person. But he was pretty close to that if you read what he says. And so now he's out, and I think that's a good thing. And again, I'm not a Democrat. I don't like Kamala Harris. I think long term she and the Democrats are enemies of the working class. But I will absolutely vote for her and encourage everyone and get out people to get out the vote for her to keep Trump out of power. And I think that Harris taking the position as the Democratic nominee has been an extremely positive development with respect to exposing Trump and MAGA for what they are. And you can see it as you guys, I don't want to have to go into the whole DEI thing and, saying Harris isn't a Black person, right? that you guys talked about that. Although I do want to say, right, that she went to Howard, which is a historically black university, and she was in a black fraternity when she was in college. There's absolutely no doubt about this. The fact that he said that shows the entire world the truth about him, which is that he is effectively Klan, right? His dad was Klan, and his entire life has been white supremacist, from wanting to execute the Central Park Five, to his policies while in office, to going after Black Lives Matter, right? He is a white supremacist. He is a fascist. And that's what MAGA is. It's a mass fascist movement, right? And that is an existential threat to Black people, to working people, to unions, and he has to be stopped. And so even though, right, I had disagreements with Biden, I have disagreements with Harris, like the fact that she, with respect to Gaza again, right? I condemn her for her positions on that, although she's now maybe evolving a little bit, but I expect that to be mostly smoke and mirrors. We have to pressure her. We have to expose her and tell the truth about the Democrats on that. And we have to address the fact that the Democrats have been cruddy with respect to actually having solutions that help the working class when it came to inflation. All of Biden and Harris's policies have been corporate side, the CHIPS Act, the infrastructure bill, all that stuff is like, that's not the type of thing that actually puts money in our pockets when we're struggling from inflation that had us lose 20% real wages in a couple of years, right? So there are major criticisms to be had, but Trump has exposed himself, and every day he can't help it. That's who he is, right? He was raised by a Klan father, and he has a white supremacist outlook, and it infects everything that he does, and he's not going to be able to stop. And I think that exposure is going to have people remember the stakes, that what is at stake in this country. And so just to say a few more things specifically about policy, I'd like for us to talk about that, right? It's really important to remember, right? We're Local 100 Fightback. We're all members of Local 100, TW Local 100, and we're all in labor unions, right? And if you are in a labor union and you support Trump and MAGA, right, you are a traitor, right? MAGA and Trump stand against the working class. They stand against our Black and Latino brothers and sisters in the union. We can see that very clearly from the policies of the far right, right? When people like Trump have gotten into office in states and taken over, like Wisconsin, Scott Walker in Wisconsin, he decimated public sector unions, basically almost making them illegal and making that they couldn't have any power like our unions have power in New York or California and places like that. Right. Again and again, when you see right-wing people like Trump take power, it leads to the gutting of unions. And the people who support Trump, like Elon Musk and other billionaires, they want to see right to work come to the entire country. Look up national right to work and see what that means, right? That would mean that even if New York has protections for unions, that federal law at the top level will mean that basically all unions in the country will be gutted. Right. And if you don't understand that and look at the history of the far right, then you are an active traitor, right, to your union and to the entire working class. Trump and MAGA also want to attack our basic programs like Social Security and Medicare. Right. They want to force people onto Medicare Advantage, just like, unfortunately, our union did with our retirees. But at least we have some contractual protections. Right, Medicare Advantage throughout the country has been a horrible attack on privatizing Medicare, and with people having care denied, dying because of that. All that history we've discussed before. It's awful, right? And when it comes to Social Security as well, the difference could not be more stark, right? You can look back on our commentary on the debate; it was very clear. Biden, one of the few good answers I think he gave was with respect to the crisis of Social Security. He had a very simple answer, which is that Social Security tax only affects people up to about $140,000 of their income. After that, that income is not taxed. He said, raise the income cap that we can tax people, up to 500,000 or a million or whatever, and that goes a big way towards helping shore up Social Security. Trump, let's be clear, in every year's budget included a tax on Social Security and on Medicare. And you can look at what the right-wing solutions with respect to Medicare are, right? A good example of that, if you look back at March, Ben Shapiro, a right-wing commentator, very in line with MAGA, right? His solution is simple. He said, people should just keep working, right? And his mild solution was raise the retirement age. What that means is just people keep working more. More people die before they actually get to retirement age, right? You get less benefits over the course of your life. And he basically was like, people are dumb. Retirement is dumb. People should just work until they die, right? And that's what scum like Ben Shapiro say, because they live a life of privilege and they are shills for billionaires who have all the money, right? And they want to work workers to death. And if you think the stakes aren't high, right, look at Elon Musk, who is now basically Trump's biggest billionaire supporter, right? He has a history, his factories have a history of racial violence and racial intimidation in Tesla. You can look that up as well in California. And he's been criticized and found against by the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board, for being anti-union. And so what does he do now? He now has sued the NLRB. And with the right-wing Supreme Court, his goal is to get the NLRB, which is the federal organization that mediates between workers and bosses. He wants to get that destroyed, right? That was a concession that the government made, right, back when unions were forming and militant back in the 30s in order to try and keep labor peace. When unions were exploding, the bosses were like, and with Roosevelt, they were like, okay, well, let's create this board, give unions some rights, and, so they won't be taking over factories and shutting down cities, which is what they were doing. So now unions have gotten weaker, and now people like Musk want to press the advantage and say, well, let's just get rid of the NLRB, because under Biden, it's been much more pro-union, quite pro-union, and under Trump, it was not so. But so basically, Musk thinks that with the Supreme Court being radical right as it is, he can get the NLRB destroyed and take away a lot of our rights. So again, the choice is clear with respect to union rights, with respect to basic programs like Medicare and Medicaid, right? That Trump represents a massive attack on the working class, on people of color, right? And an attack on our basic democratic rights as well. January 6th, and then all the lies about election fraud and these election deniers who are in office in Arizona and in key places in Georgia and other places in the country, right? All running under the GOP, all wanting to undermine our elections and stop and decrease the black vote and take away our basic civil and democratic rights that people fought and died for, right? It's a simple, stark choice that even if you're not a Democrat and you have major differences with the Democrats, and as I do, I know as John does, it still is a simple fact that the threat that MAGA fascism represents to unions, to workers, to black people, to people of color, to immigrants, to women, to LGBTQ plus people is so great, right, that we need to stand up. And that means that Local 100 Fight Back is actually going to put its money where its mouth is. We're in discussions now with trying to start to reach out to transit workers and go to places in Pennsylvania, talk to unionized workers there, to talk about what the stakes are, because I feel like there aren't that many union workers who have the perspective that we do, and can actually talk about the threats to unions, and so and to other workers. And so we plan to be reaching out to that. So you should look out for that. And if you want to get involved, if you realize the stakes are high and you don't want to see fascism in this country, you don't want to see Social Security and Medicare destroyed, you don't want to see national right to work, then reach out to us and make a difference.
Yeah, in terms of the attacks on labor unions, I mean, when your enemies, are openly bragging about what they're going to do, and when they show you who they are, you should believe them. I mean, if you have any confusion about that, look at what the very same people, the Heritage Foundation, 100 right-wing think tanks and advocacy groups and activist groups, what they were saying when Trump was elected the first time. Who are their nominees for the Supreme Court? They had a list, and they dictated exactly who he should appoint. And it's exactly what he did. And he also swore up and down he was never going to attack Medicare and Social Security, that these were rights. And he attacked other Republicans, saying, how could you dare suggest that we're going to attack these rights? But yet, as Seth pointed out, in every budget, there were attempts to attack entitlements and attack what they call entitlements, what the right wing calls entitlements. And for us, it's not a question of a popularity contest. And I think that workers need to stop thinking of elections as a popularity contest. Who you like, who you want to have a beer with, who you can relate to. It's a matter of choosing who your enemy's leadership will be for the next 4 years. Okay, the president of the United States is the chief executive of the ruling class, of the single biggest imperialist, blood-soaked empire the world has ever known. The question is, who is the more dangerous enemy? And we have rights in this country because workers died and fought for and died to win the rights to basic democratic rights, to civil rights, and to human rights. It was our struggles that founded the ability for us to use this as a method of self-defense. Do we have any illusions that it's going to stop the rise of fascism, that just voting blue, no matter who, is going to change that? No, we don't. But we understand that you pick up any method of self-defense in a fight for your life. And we have to be honest with ourselves that this is where we are as a country. It's not where we want to be. We would much rather this be a country that was fighting fascism in the way we've seen others fight fascism successfully in the Spanish Civil War, not so much in the Spanish Civil War, but in other cases, like, for example, what's going on in France, where you see a massive social movement mobilizing to begin to stand up to the fascist threat there. You've seen general strikes before against these kind of attacks on workers' rights. We would hope this country would be there. But we have to be honest with ourselves that we're not. And given the balance of forces, if we do nothing and if we refuse to use rights that workers fought for and died for to defend ourselves and to give us the space and time to build those kinds of struggles, what we're doing is throwing up our hands and saying our class doesn't have any solutions, our class doesn't have any power, our institutions don't have any power, we don't have any ability to force whoever is the president of the United States to do anything for us, and we're just willing to throw up our hands and do nothing. And that is not going to win other classes to our side, and it's not going to make the world any better than it is now. It's going to actually lead to more hopelessness. And it's also going to wave the red flag in front of the bull for Trump and MAGA fascists to do what they do on the regular and what they've promised to do. And as somebody who's a member of a union, that I'm proud of it. Whatever they may want to say that we're anti-union, we are the most proud of our trade union history. We're the most proud of our institutions, and we are the ones that are standing at all times to defend members' democratic rights. If we stand to defend our democratic rights within our union, why in the world we sit on the sidelines with our hands, we're sitting on our hands to do nothing to stop the single greatest attempt at an assault on those rights in the history of this country? When they talk about mass deportation, what kind of country does that make the United States? What does it mean for immigrant workers who are members of unions? What does it mean for the whole world in terms of the kind of escalation that can be? And what does it mean to add fuel to the fire of white supremacy in this country? We cannot be silent. And you may not think that voting solves all your problems, but our class being passive and being silent is never a good idea. It's suicide. Ray, I know you probably have thoughts and comments.
Yeah, I do. as you said, we are union workers. We're also transit workers, and I think most people are not, they're aware of some of the things Project 2025 says, but they're not aware of what it says about mass transit. Section 19 is all about their plans for DOT. Here on page 635, a better definition for public transit, which would also require congressional, or I should say, starting at page 634, it says, unfortunately, DOT now defines public transit only as transit provided by municipal governments. This means that when individuals change their commute from urban buses to rideshare or electric scooter, the use of public transit decreases. A better definition of public transit, which would also require congressional legislation, would be transit provided for the public rather than provided by the municipality. In other words, they want to be able to classify Lime scooters and Uber and Lyft as fucking mass transit and take
Yes.
that away from us. Also,
Mass privatization.
they also want to take away end the DOT's practice of the way it does grants. As it is, DOT gives grants to specific agencies for things like, say, Gateway Tunnel Project, Second Avenue expansion, the QBX or whatever they're calling that theoretical train from in through the Bronx and Queens, and it said they would just do one large grant to each state for the state to to write up as to hand out as they see fit. Imagine being a transit worker in a place like Dallas. DART is not the greatest system, but imagine if they had to fight for their money from the governor, well, who wants to instead rebuild a bunch of highways instead of buying them more buses. Also, here on 635, since facilitating travel for workers is one of the core functions of mass transit system, a permanent reduction in commuting raises questions about the viability of fixed route mass transit, especially considering that transit systems required substantial subsidization before the pandemic. Uh, the largest expense in transit operational budgets is labor. Compensation costs for transit workers exceeded both regional and sector compensation averages. This is driven by generous pension and health benefits rather than by exorbitant wages. Since workers value wages more than they value fringe benefits, this has led to a perverse situation in which transit agencies have high compensation costs yet struggle to attract workers. The next administration can remove the largest obstacle to reforming labor costs. Section 10C of the Urban Mass Transportation Act of 1964 was originally intended to protect bargaining rights for workers in privately owned transit systems that were being absorbed by government operated agencies. The provision has mutated into a requirement that any transit agency receiving federal funds cannot reduce compensation, an interpretation that far exceeds the original statute. Returning to the original intent would allow transit agencies to adjust fringe benefits without fearing a federal lawsuit. In other words, they want to give the transit agencies like the MTA the ability to reduce your benefits and be within the letter of the law. They want to make Uber a mass transit agency because people and use it en masse. They want to redefine mass transit for the worse and very much to our to harm us. I mean, if an Uber driver is now a mass transit worker, then we're in a lot of trouble. I know that used to be one of their goals to be competitor for mass transit. In some cities, some smaller cities, it actually is a form of mass transit. They found it was easier to reimburse for Uber rides than it was to run buses because they're too spread out. But imagine that in New York, if you could book an Uber and and now that's funded by mass transit instead of taking a bus or a subway.
Yeah. Well, and that's all in addition
Yeah.
to the fact that Project 2025 calls for mass firings of the better part of the federal workforce,
Mm-hmm.
which are the overwhelming majority of the unionized workers in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
It's Patco on steroids. It's 1,000 times worse than
Oh,
Patco.
and there is one more thing that I think MTA workers will really appreciate here. Page 636. The FRA has noticed that proposed rulemaking on crew size is not based on safety considerations. It is designed to reduce flexibility by making it possible for railroads to operate with crews of fewer than two in circumstances where there is no operational need for the second crew member. So they would dramatically expand Opto, which is an absolute fucking red line for this union.
Yeah. And by the way, Ray, Have you heard anything from our union leaders about this?
From our leaders, no, but I think a lot of our union members, I don't think they know about this, and a lot of our members don't, because anyone, especially in subways, who supports Trump is just stabbing themselves in the fucking back. You're going to cost yourself work. You're going to cost your brothers and sisters jobs just because you think the president controls the price of gas.
Well said.
All right, Seth, I'm sure you have comments.
Yeah, no, and thank you. There was a lot of that I didn't know, Ray. That's some good research right there, and I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah, very informative for relevant for trans workers. John said a little bit about this, but I do want to go into it in more detail, right? So a lot of the stuff we're talking about is from Project 2025 or from other people in the right wing, and Trump has tried to distance himself from Project 2025, but we have to, right? The important thing is, right, is to understand Trump for who he is and look at his track record with respect to things. Now, Trump is not. He's not. In some ways, he shows himself to be a very unintelligent person, but he is very. He is very clever in very dangerous ways, as a lot of sociopaths are, right? And so he knows he's desperate, right, to shore up his weak points, and so he lies over and over again about the things that he thinks might be weak points with respect to things that are unpopular on issues of abortion, on issues of Project 2025, and he's more savvy than other people on the far right who are just so gung ho that they're like, no, we want to restrict women from going from state to state, and find out if they're menstruating or something. That's that level of insanity. But it's important to show that Trump's track record when he's in office shows that everything he's saying now about abortion, about union rights, about things like Project 2025, he's lying, right? We know he lies over and over again. These lies are important because he's saying, oh, if I get in office, I'm not going to be for a national abortion ban. I'm not going to be for national right to work, right? But we saw what he did when he was in office, and now we know he's going to be more unhinged the next time he's in office. And so anything he says, distancing himself from Project 2025, anything he says about abortion, anything he says about Social Security, he's lying, right? We know that all he's doing is trying to get into office. And the piece I want to connect up to that is the stuff about going back to unions. Some people may say, oh, look, what's the guy's name? Sean O'Brien, the head of the Teamsters, spoke at the RNC, right? Right. So if you look back at Germany in the 1930s, fascism tried hard to appeal to working people, to the working class. In fact, they actually added, right, they were a nationalist party, but they added socialist to their name just because socialist was very popular there. Nazism is the exact opposite of socialism, right? And that's what you can see when they got into office and they got power. The first thing they did was kill socialists and communists and union leaders. But they added socialist to their name, National Socialist, even though they're not socialist, and National Socialism is a contradiction. They did that to try and appeal to working people. And Trump and MAGA fascism are doing the exact same thing with their populism, right? They had a speaker, right? They had the head of the Teamsters come speak at their thing, and they're trying to say that they're for the U.S. worker and things like that. But everything they do, everything Trump does, everything right-wing governors do, right? Then you have in Texas that even in the massive heat, that workers aren't allowed a cooling break or a water break, right? That's Governor Abbott. Thank you so much for that, right? All these things. Trump's National Labor Relations Board was extremely hostile, and his Supreme Court extremely hostile to unions, right? So we see that they're trying to appeal to working people with his populism. But what does he say about a real union leader who actually stands up and shakes the system by the head of the UAW by leading a massive strike? What does he say about him? Oh, he's an enemy, right? He's a horrible leader, and that the union the UAW workers should get rid of him. When this is the guy who broke the two-tiered wage system, right, through a massive set of strikes and got them massive wage increases to make up for their losses, right? That's the head of the UAW, and Trump says that he's an enemy. So that tells you what you need to know. All of Trump and MAGA's posing that they're for working people, right, are really just are clear lies and right out of the fascist playbook that they're doing to trying to appeal to workers. But once power is taken, unions get smashed. And the stuff with respect to immigration, right? It's once again right out of the fascist playbook. In Germany in the 30s, it was Jews, right? In America now, it's migrants, right? It's immigrants, and they are the scapegoat, and they are the ones going to be attacked. They're the people who are the most vulnerable in society are the ones who the fascists turn on and try and whip up sentiment again. They're your enemy, not the Elon Musks and the Warren Buffetts, right? And the Zuckerbergs and all those people who are actually the ones who are crushing the working class while we work harder and harder for less wages and people don't have pensions and inflation guts us, right? The billionaires, the capitalist class are our enemy, and the fascists will do anything to divert, right? Because they are capitalist formation. They will do anything to divert and find a weak group to use as a scapegoat to whip up hatred, right? To build their movement.
Yeah, it's the classic playbook to find an other to make the scapegoat for all the problems in society. But the other thing too is like with Trump, the idea that Trump is actually driving what's going to happen is a bit of a fantasy. Like he has his own aims and he has his own reasons for doing what he does. A lot of them have to do with staying out of jail. A lot of them have to do with him being starved for resources to pay off the fines he owes. But not just that, all the loans, all the credit, all the debt he owes. And that's why, for example, even though it wasn't in his political interest to do so, and the advice he got was stupid and self-defeating from his idiot sons and Elon Musk and Tucker Carlson, he was hell-bent on making J.D. Vance his vice presidential candidate. Not because of anything that J.D. Vance as a person would help his campaign, his likelihood of winning the presidency or anything like that, but simply because J.D. Vance is a cipher for billions and billions of dollars of tech bro, crypto fascist money coming from Peter Thiel and company, coming from, 1,001 crackpot libertarian fascist shithead tech bros who want to get their hands on state power, and they have aims and objectives that aren't necessarily what Trump has in mind. But he is not driving this train anymore. He is dependent upon their money to get him over the finish line so that he doesn't go to jail, so that he doesn't wind up in a very uncomfortable situation with people who you don't want to owe money to. And so it's more, there's more of a dynamic going on this time than there was in 2016. In 2016, he really was making a lot of the decisions about the campaign and about what he would do in power. Whereas now the urgency is different and who is dictating what will happen is different. And even then in 2016, he still gave them pretty much everything they wanted. Like he still, implemented their Sharia law Supreme Court. He implemented, pretty much anything they wanted in terms of tax cuts. But now he's actually desperate, and he's going to the billionaires in the oil industry and the oil and gas industry and saying, look, if you guys give me $1 billion to run for president, I'll give you carte blanche. I'll give you whatever you want. And all his machismo is just a veneer. Deep down, he's weak, and deep down, his movement is not a majoritarian movement and is not able to be to seize power on their own. Like even when they tried to launch their insurrection in Washington, D.C., a lot of it was kind of like, although it was organized by lunatic right-wing fringe people. It wasn't organized by the military or anything like that. It wasn't a coup d'etat in that way, right? So he needs these other forces in order to survive politically, to survive personally from criminal prosecution, and also to get power again. And so we should be clear-eyed about who are the forces behind him too, because it's not just about him. It's not just about his movement. It's about the billions of dollars that are attempting to buy this election. And unfortunately, under capitalism, what passes for democracy is actually bought and paid for by who can pay and who has the resources. And, after Citizens United, capitalists are, corporations are people, according to Mitt Romney and all of this. And they can buy and bribe and bully their way to purchasing our democratic rights, to purchasing our state power, and weaponizing that state power against the people who produce everything in this society and against those who have rights that they want to make disappear. And so it's a very dangerous situation. It's more than just Trump, and we have to be honest with ourselves about that. And it's the only reason why he has a chance. It's the only reason. This is like a 40, 50-year project. And Trump is their weapon. He's their messenger. He's a weapon in their hands to get what they want. So it's much more complicated than just, this particular fascistic white supremacist billionaire dickhead. It's way bigger than that. And it's a class battle too. And it's also trying to weaponize certain things about the failure of the Democratic Party over 40, 50 years in their lives and their inability to actually advocate for working class interests, and weaponizing that and turning it against, the working class, and using people's relative privilege to divide and conquer and as a wedge to get them the state power that they want. Does that make sense? Or?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so we need to wrap up soon because we generally try not to go longer than an hour, and now we're like at an hour and a half, but we had a whole lot to cover, and it's understandable that it would be a wide range of discussion. Ray, do you have any comments in closing?
Yeah, in closing, just to touch briefly on what you guys said about Sean O'Brien speaking at the RNC. It's like, yeah, he spoke, but look at the response he got. He got none whatsoever. They did not like him. He was not someone they wanted to hear from. His message was not one that the crowd wanted to hear. And it doesn't matter that he spoke to them. It matters that they didn't give a shit what he said, because he's a union leader, and the GOP is inherently anti-union.
Yeah, that's a good point. Just a couple things quickly. John, I appreciate your comments about the billionaires behind Trump and MAGA, and it's important to say that because once again, right, it's important to point out that unlike socialism or communism, fascism is a capitalist movement, right, and it is supported by billionaires. The fascists, key part of the fascist movements in Europe in the 30s were support by, they had a sector of the capitalist class who were behind it. And just, we're seeing that here with Peter Thiel and now Elon Musk. It represents a particular virulent sector of the ruling class. These people who think that they're gods, who are extremely anti-labor, who want to take away, and racist too, who want to rip back all the gains that working people and Black people have made over the past 150 years. Take us back to Jim Crow, take us back to before unions were legal, and you see that in places where Ron DeSantis slips and other people slip, and they talk about hey, slavery wasn't that bad, and it's people had it good in slavery in the South, and Jim Crow wasn't that bad, and so we see that, and Local 100 Fight Back has socialists in it. John and I are socialists. we recognize that billionaires are behind the Democratic Party as well. That's why we say that in the long term, right, both parties, neither party is a solution, right? But that because of the tactical situation and the danger from MAGA and fascism, that we have to use whatever tools we have. And in that case, this means voting to keep the fascists out of power. But, you know, the Democratic Party is supported by billionaires as well. Their base is among unions and among people of color in the cities. But those are always at attention. And that's why after a Democratic president's in office for a while, there's always a demoralization and disappointment. People are like, you know, oh, we got Obama or we got Biden and this is what we got. You know, it's so we need to, that's why we're saying that elections are not a solution, but they are a tool we need to use here. But that we do need, you know, workers, the working class needs its own political organizations. We do need to organize, and that our labor power, our ability to strike, our ability to shut down cities can transform society, you know, and change the world. We have to keep organizing towards that. It's the only thing that can fight back effectively against fascism. But right now, right, there is a stark choice, and we need to keep Trump out of office, and that means a vote for the Democrats and for Harris. And I just want to say one last thing with respect to the dangers. We talked about the danger to unions, about dangers to workers, dangers to immigrants, the dangers to Social Security, all these things showing that support for Trump and for MAGA is a vote against working people and a vote against Black people and a vote against basic civil rights. We have to remember, too, that if we look back at January 6, 2020, that the system barely held, right? If Mike Pence had done something differently, if things had gone a little differently, right, we would not have had Biden take office. Now they learned, Trump and MAGA learned their lessons from that, and they're putting key people into electoral positions that are going to make this election hard. And if Trump wins, he's going to have 4 years to replace people in the government, to replace people in the Department of Justice, to replace people in the military, right? And if you think that after those 4 years that we're going to have a free and fair election where we're going to actually be able to vote out MAGA, you are 100% wrong, right? Just look at what Viktor Orban did. Look at what Vladimir Putin did, right? This is their playbook. That's why they openly, J.D. Vance, Peter Thiel, Trump, they all, right, Tucker Carlson, they all are very admiring of Putin. They're admiring of Viktor Orban, right? And that's what's at stake. Our basic democratic rights are at stake. January 6th shows that. And so that is what at stake here, in addition to all the other things that we mentioned, right? So it is vital that transit workers and other workers, unionized workers and unionized, non-unionized workers come together, and that we use, at this key point, we keep organizing on the ground, fighting back against capitalism, fighting in our workplace, forming working class organizations, trying to form working class parties, trying to build towards strikes and general strikes. We have to do all of that, right? But right now, right, we do have another tool in our toolbox that can keep fascism out of power for another 4 years, right? And we have to use that now to keep Trump out.
And also, you know, we also need to understand that this election and what we do in the very near future is a fight for the soul of the labor movement as well. You know, Sean O'Brien is a clown. Sean O'Brien is a useful idiot dancing for them. He went and danced for them is what he did. He went and covered their ass. A thoroughly right-wing anti-worker party that has nothing but contempt and racist scorn for the majority of workers in this country. There's a different soul of unionism that's beginning to be shown in the letter of the 7 unions that represent more than half of the unionized workforce in this country, that are calling for the United States to cease weapons shipments to Israel and cut off U.S. military aid to Israeli genocide. They are also, the leader of it, Sean Fain, is calling for a general strike on May 1st, 2028, no matter who the president is, and to unite all of the contract expirations at one time and putting forth a call for a general strike. Now, Sean Fain has all sorts of shortcomings. I don't think he should have given Biden carte blanche in terms of endorsing him unless he got concessions over Gaza or other trade union issues. But I think that when you do see a culture being developed within the trade union movement of political independence and of a class consciousness that says no matter who the boss is, we're going to shut you down and we're going to cripple the economy unless we get what we want, is a much more militant marker for workers to look at and to start to think about how our class can impose its will upon the bosses. And it's not everything, but it is a step in terms of framing the consciousness of working class people in a class conscious direction. So just as the election is a fight for the soul of this country in terms of whether we're going to have any democratic, civil, trade union, bodily autonomy rights going forward, in the same way, we have to look at the trade union struggle and we have to pressure those who are pointing in the direction of class conscious leadership and make demands on them and force them to actually lead the kinds of struggles that can change the balance of forces and put us on our class in a much better position to really defend ourselves from fascism. So I just wanted to frame that as some of the discussions that we need to be having going forward about how do we make those changes? How do we apply pressure to the leaders who are actually pointing in the right direction to actually stiffen their spines and make sure that it actually happens. Thank you so much for everyone who's joined us. Thank you very much for everyone who commented. Please keep the comments coming. The discussion never ends, although the live stream, well, it does have to have a physical limit. The discussion doesn't. So we look forward to learning from your experiences. And we look forward to hearing from people who want to get involved. Who want to get involved in going out, as Seth talked about, to swing states like Pennsylvania or other places to begin to talk to other union workers about the stakes in this election and it not be just an appendage of the Democratic Party, but actually represent workers coming together to have a dialogue about their own class interests with the backdrop of this election. We don't want to be just foot soldiers in the army of the Democratic Party. We don't support the Democratic Party and we don't support the Republican Party. We don't support any capitalist parties, but we have to begin to engage in independent political action ourselves. No matter that we may need to vote for one of these parties to stop fascism, it doesn't change the fact that we need political independence and we need to be driving the discussion. And that's what we're trying to do. So we hope that you'll join us in that. Thank you so much for your time. Everybody have a great night. We'll be coming to you real soon about RTO and local-wide issues. We haven't forgotten about any of that. We have been trying to organize ourselves to try to provide a new leadership of Local 100. We're going to be talking to you about that real soon. Thank you so much for joining, and we'll see you guys real soon.
All right.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.